What if someone claimed to be from the year 2062? Would you scoff at him? Or would you listen, even for a moment? In most cases, such a claim would be dismissed as a joke, a hoax, or the rambling of someone chasing attention online. But in late 2010, something strange happened on the internet, something that to this day still makes people pause and wonder. It began quietly, almost too quietly, on a Japanese internet forum called 2channel, an anonymous bulletin board known for everything from gossip and fan theories to wild rumors. Among the thousands of posts made that day, one message stood out not because it was loud, but because it was unsettlingly specific. The post read, "I come from the year 2062. The user didn't offer jokes or stories. He claimed to be a time traveler, not from some parallel world, not a metaphor, an actual visitor from 52 years in the future. According to him, he hadn't arrived out of curiosity or by accident. He was here on a mission. One that, he said, could determine whether humanity survives or vanishes entirely." Of course, at first, nobody took it seriously. This was the internet after all. Time traveler posts were nothing new. They came and went, often with dramatic flair but zero substance. Most users shrugged it off, labeling it as just another prank. But this post ended with something different, a code. A strange mixture of Japanese syllables, phonetic spellings, and what appeared to be deliberate distortions of language, like a riddle hiding in plain sight. It looked like gibberish at first, but beneath it, the writer left a simple note. "This is advice for modern humanity." That was all. No follow-up, no explanation, just a cryptic sentence and an unsettling string of characters. For most users, that was the end of it, a weird post buried under the noise of the internet. But a small group of users didn't let it go. They began breaking down the symbols, decoding the sounds, searching for patterns. After several weeks of analysis, one translation began to circulate. It said, "Run to the mountains." That's it, 4 words. And yet in hindsight, they would come to haunt everyone who had seen them. At the time, the phrase made no sense. Run from what? And why the mountains? It sounded like the sort of thing you'd find in an obscure horror novel, not a real warning from a time traveler. So the post was forgotten, laughed off. Another strange whisper in the endless scroll of internet threads. And then it happened. On the morning of March 11th, 2011, just 4 months after the original message appeared, northeastern Japan was struck by one of the most devastating natural disasters in modern history. A magnitude 9.0 earthquake tore through the ocean floor off the coast of Tohoku, triggering a monstrous tsunami that reached over 40 meters high in some areas. Entire towns were obliterated. Over 20,000 people were killed or went missing. And at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, a partial meltdown would lead to the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. The nation stood still. The world watched in horror. And online, somewhere deep within old forum threads, someone remembered those 4 words, "Run to the mountains." Suddenly, what had seemed like nonsense felt like prophecy. People rushed back to the original post, digging through screenshots, comparing timestamps. There it was, dated months before the disaster, a warning ignored and now too late. The internet, once dismissive, began to tremble with a strange new energy. Was it all just coincidence? Or had someone truly tried to warn the world? That single phrase changed everything. Suddenly, the man calling himself 2062 was no longer just a joke. He was a mystery and perhaps a messenger. And just when the world started to forget again, he returned. Just 4 months after the Tohoku disaster, when Japan was still grieving and rebuilding, the mysterious figure from 2062 made his return. It was July 2011, and without warning, he posted again on 2channel. the same forum where his first message had appeared. This time, he didn't just drop a cryptic code, he stayed longer. He responded to a few users who had recognized his original message. The questions came fast. Did you know about the earthquake? What else is going to happen? Why are you really here? But 2062 didn't give much away. He answered vaguely, offering little more than hints. And then, just like before, he vanished, leaving behind only a date, April 2016. That was when he said he'd return again. He didn't explain why. He didn't say what would happen, but he asked people to be mentally prepared. Whatever was coming, he implied, would be serious. The internet watched, then waited. And 5 years later, in April 2016, it happened again. On April 14th, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake struck Kumamoto in southern Japan. It was followed by a second, stronger quake 2 days later. Buildings collapsed, roads cracked, and families were forced to flee. Over 200 people were killed or injured. The aftershocks continued for days. And on April 15th, just 1 day after the first quake, right on schedule, 2062 posted again. He kept his promise, but this time something had changed. He didn't answer questions. He didn't engage in conversation. Dozens of users reached out, some begging for answers. Others demanded proof, but he ignored every message. He left behind only a few words. I will return on May 17th. And then silence. This pattern, warning disaster reappearance, was becoming too strange to ignore. At this point, even skeptics began to admit something was going on. Because on May 16th, 1 day before his promised return, another earthquake struck Japan. This time it hit Ibaraki Prefecture, just northeast of Tokyo. While not as deadly as the previous ones, it rattled a nation already on edge. 3 appearances, 3 disasters, all within a day of each other, and all connected to the same anonymous figure who claimed to be from 2062. It wasn't just the timing, it was the precision. People began to dig deeper into his posts. Every word, every phrase was analyzed, and more importantly, they started taking him seriously. When he returned on May 17th, true to his word, something unexpected happened. He finally began to explain himself. Not everything and not clearly, but enough to spark even more questions. He spoke about technology, time travel, rules. According to him, time travel had become possible in the future, not through magic but through 2 specific devices. One was called the Vicious 5000, used to move people forward through time. The other was the PlusNex 6290, designed to send travelers backward into the past. But these devices weren't available to just anyone. They were controlled by a powerful global authority, the Temporal Management Bureau, an organization dedicated to one thing, preserving the stability of the timeline. Their mission was strict, their rules unbreakable. Rule 1, do not interfere. Rule 2, do not reveal too much. Rule 3, do not exploit future knowledge. And Rule 4, the most terrifying of all, break any of these and you will be erased. Not just punished, not imprisoned, erased, completely removed from the timeline as if you had never existed. 2062 explained that he couldn't stay in the past for long. His presence was being monitored. Every appearance had a time limit, enforced by something even he couldn't override. And when users pushed him for answers about future disasters, he gave only one clear warning. A third world war was coming. The internet had already been shaken by his earthquake predictions. But when 2062 spoke of war, the conversation shifted from curiosity to fear. He didn't speak in riddles this time. He was direct. According to him, a third world war would erupt before the year 2030. But unlike the wars of the past, fueled by invasions, revolutions, or ideological clashes, This one would not start with a bang, but with a quiet buildup. It would stem from decades of unresolved tensions between two Asian nations. He refused to name them, but he said the conflict had been simmering for years, ignored by global leaders, buried beneath diplomacy and denials. This war, he claimed, would not begin with nuclear weapons. That perhaps was the only good news. Instead, it would involve something far more insidious: chemical weapons. According to 2062, these weapons would not just kill, they would linger, poisoning the air, the land, and the water. Cities wouldn't just be bombed, they'd become uninhabitable wastelands. He said, Japan will come perilously close to being erased from the map. That statement struck a nerve. Japan wasn't just a backdrop for his predictions, it was his audience. And he was telling them their homeland might not survive. According to him, the war would unfold in stages. Asia would ignite first, followed by Russia, then the Middle East, and eventually Europe and the United States. This wouldn't be a war fought with soldiers and tanks. It would be a total collapse, political, social, environmental. A chain reaction of chaos. But what made his warning especially terrifying was the idea that it wouldn't start all at once. There would be signs, small at first, then growing louder. And by the time the world realized what was happening, it would be too late. 2062 never claimed the war was inevitable. He always left the door open. You still have time, he said, but not much. To many, that sounded like a plea, like someone from a scorched future trying to warn the past before it made the same mistake. And yet, he always circled back to one truth. He could only say so much. Time travel, as he explained it, came with strict restrictions. The Temporal Management Bureau monitored every appearance, every message. Too much interference with the timeline could destabilize reality itself. Every piece of information he gave had to walk a fine line between warning and overstepping. But his presence was starting to have an impact. People were preparing, some in subtle ways, others more openly. Forums began compiling his messages. Researchers started digging through history for clues to the unnamed nations he referenced. And some, quietly, began changing their lives, moving inland, studying survival tactics, or simply paying more attention to global news. Still, critics ask the same question. If the war is coming, why not stop it? Why tell us and do nothing? His answer was cryptic but chilling. My mission is not to change the future. It is to inform the past. That single line sparked endless debate. What kind of future sends back a messenger only to warn, not to intervene? Was it compassion or control? Were they helping us prepare, or just watching to see what we do? 2062 never gave a clear answer, but he did suggest that Earth's timeline, our collective history, is not entirely ours to control. According to him, time is not just a measurement. It is a structure, a force, an intelligence. And when you tamper with it too much, it pushes back. That's why his visits were brief. That's why his words were limited. That's why, despite knowing what lay ahead, he couldn't stop it. He was here to deliver a message, not to rewrite the script. And then, once again, he was gone. And as we move into the next phase of this story, the question becomes not just what happens next, but whether we've already set that future in motion without even knowing it. By the time 2062 made his final return in 2016, something had shifted. He was no longer treated like an internet hoax. The Japanese public, still scarred from the disasters he had seemingly predicted, now paid closer attention to his words. And it was in that appearance that he made his most chilling claim yet. He said that before the year 2030, a third world war would erupt, but not like the wars of the past. This one, he warned, would begin slowly, quietly, not with a nuclear launch or a single headline-grabbing event. It would emerge from decades of unresolved tension between two unnamed nations in Asia, tensions that would ignite a domino effect across the planet. According to him, the world wouldn't see it coming until it was already too late. Asia would fall first. Then, piece by piece, the Middle East, Russia, Europe, and eventually the United States would be pulled into the fire. And though many assumed the greatest threat would come from nuclear weapons, 2062 said otherwise. He warned of something even worse: chemical weapons. Agents designed not to destroy cities with blasts, but to corrupt the very air people breathe, to rot flesh from bone, to poison rivers and skies. And unlike radiation, which fades over time, these weapons were designed to linger. Japan, he claimed, would be among the hardest hit. Entire cities would be wiped out. Survivors would flee. A nation that once stood as a symbol of resilience would become a shattered landscape of memory and ruin. And still, 2062 emphasized, this future wasn't set in stone. It was only one possible outcome, one that could still be prevented if humanity listened. But that was the problem, because listening requires belief. And by 2020, the world had already grown louder, more distracted, and more divided than ever before. Then came his final message. Not a paragraph, not a warning, just a date, July 4, 2025. He didn't say what would happen, only that the world should be prepared. And with that, 2062 disappeared forever. No one has heard from him since. After the mysterious figure known as 2062 vanished, many thought the story had ended. But those who had followed his appearances closely noticed something strange. Hidden in his final posts were two cryptic messages, coded strings of text left without explanation. For years, internet users tried to decipher them, treating them like riddles. Most gave up, but one phrase stood out among the rest. It translated to this: in 2025, the seal will weaken. At first glance, it didn't make much sense. What seal, and why 2025? But some began to connect it with other sources, ancient texts, obscure prophecies, and even fictional works that seemed to echo the same idea. That Earth was not just a planet, but a kind of spiritual quarantine zone. According to these theories, Earth was chosen to house souls that had failed to evolve elsewhere. And the seal was a kind of energetic barrier, an invisible field surrounding the planet, preventing these souls from escaping until they had learned the lessons of balance, compassion, and truth. What 2062 seemed to be suggesting is that the year 2025 marks the moment when that barrier begins to dissolve. Not a violent end, but a transition, a shift in energy, perception, and possibly even reality itself. Some claimed this would mean an awakening, a sudden increase in intuition, synchronicity, and spiritual awareness across the globe. Others feared it would open the door to forces humanity isn't ready to face, both from within and beyond. And this is where the story gets even stranger. In the final months before disappearing, 2062 made a passing reference to something he called the Temporal Management Bureau. According to him, this agency exists not in our time, but in his. Its job: to oversee all time travel operations, protect timelines, and monitor anomalies. And more importantly, to make sure that history stays on its intended path. But what he revealed next shook even the most skeptical readers. He claimed that he wasn't the only one who had traveled back, that there were others. Some were like him, observers, messengers, but some, he said, had broken the rules. He warned that certain individuals had begun to tamper with key events in human history, changing outcomes, sowing conflict, and guiding technological progress not for peace, but for control. In his words, "There are those among you now who do not belong to this century, and their mission is not to help you." It's a terrifying thought. that some of the people we look to as leaders, visionaries, or influencers may not be who they seem. That hidden forces, perhaps even from our own future, are shaping the world in ways we can't detect. But if that's true, how would we ever know? 2062 never gave names, never gave proof, but he did offer one final clue. He said the true signal that the seal is weakening would not be war or disaster, but the sudden appearance of knowledge that seems to come from nowhere. Ideas, inventions, and movements that feel too advanced for their time. He said we would start to see children being born with unusual awareness, people having memories they can't explain, an increase in prophetic dreams, unexplainable synchronicities, and the feeling that time itself is becoming unstable. And most disturbing of all, he said that those who feel the shift most strongly would be the ones the world tries hardest to silence. So we're left with a choice. Do we dismiss all of this as fantasy, another internet myth that got out of control? Or do we consider, just for a moment, the possibility that we've been warned about something real? Because if the seal really is weakening, then the most important question isn't what's coming. It's what are we becoming? He vanished without a trace. No more replies, no more predictions, only silence. But before he disappeared forever, 2062 left behind one last message. A major event will happen in 2024. Now that we are living in 2025, we can't help but look back. Record heat waves scorched the planet. Superstorms shattered coastlines. Cities drowned in floods. Did we already witness what he warned us about? Or is the real event still waiting? Some say he was a fraud. Others believe he was part of a larger design, a system trying to warn us before it's too late. But maybe, just maybe, this was never about believing in one man. Maybe it's about listening before the next warning arrives. So we ask you, was 2062 a hoax or a messenger? And more importantly, are we ready for what comes next?